Welcome back to Music 239, Intro to World Music. I'm going to start today's session on India with a story about my college roommates. My college roommates were all trumpet players like I was, and they were always looking for free meals, like most college students. And they found an ad in the student newspaper that said, free lunch. Just show up at this time, this place. And so they did it. And I was not along. I don't know why I wasn't there, but I didn't get to go on this trip. But they went, and it turned out to be a lunch provided by a group of Hare Krishna individuals who were there to provide them a wonderful free lunch, but they had to chant first. And they had to chant a little Hare Krishna tune that went something like this. Hare Krishna, Hare Hare, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Hare. This went on for 45 minutes. Try to imagine being in that situation and having to chant that same chant over and over for such a long period of time. This is similar to the bhajan that you heard in one of your musical examples for this unit, a devotional song, which is meant to be sung over and over again. And I have another example here to play you of the kind of bhajan that you might sing if you were to go to an Indian devotional service. Okay, now in that example, what instrumentation are we hearing? Anybody want to venture a guess? We've got male and female vocals. What else do we have? Like some kind of an accordion, or possibly a concertina, which is a miniature version of the accordion. That's possible. What else did we hear?
Percussion.
Percussion, right. What kind of percussion did we hear? Some sort of drums, didn't we? Yeah, some sort of drums. And it's very likely that the drums that we were hearing were not the mridangam drum that you are hearing in Sarasiruha, your 22-minute example that I'm sure you all listened to this weekend. But instead, it was probably the tabla, which you see an example of here. Okay? We're going to talk about the tabla a little bit more. This is an instrument from North India, whereas the instruments that we are studying on our CD are actually from the south of India. But the tabla are probably the most famous drums of India, and so we'll be spending just a little bit of time looking at those later in this unit. But back to the bhajan. Like my roommates listening to the Hare Krishna chant, you have to listen to this music for roughly 45 minutes or so before you're allowed to move on to something else. In their case, get to eat lunch. Now, what does that do, listening to a single piece over and over for such a long period of time? Yes?
I think it would put you in a trance kind of state.
That's what it's designed, yeah. It would put you in a trance kind of state, and that's what it's designed to do. As an assistance to meditation. You think you get bored? Probably. At first, you probably would. But that's only after about 15 minutes. After about 45 minutes, all of a sudden, you would find that your mind was starting to relax and float downstream, to use the words of John Lennon. Okay? And all of a sudden you enter a different state of consciousness. And that is the whole purpose of meditation and the whole purpose of this music for devotional purposes. Now, how does that relate to Sarasiruha, the music that you presumably listened to over the weekend for 22 minutes and 30 seconds? A long time. Yeah, that is a long time to listen to a single piece of music. And yet, if you listen to a Mahler symphony, you're doing the same thing, are you not? Yeah, are you not? I mean, the attention span of the average symphony goer has to be long enough to listen to long movements of Mahler symphonies. So 22 minutes of a single piece of music is not all that much different and all that much to ask in terms of a concert goer. This is a concert, remember, that might go on for 8 to 10 hours, possibly. Okay, so as we get back to listening and looking at Sarasiruha, remember that it was written to the goddess Saraswati, who is the goddess of music in India. And last time we talked about the Kriti in the middle, which is the main event, the main course of this particular meal. In your text, you will find the translation of the text of this Kriti, which was written in the 19th century, and so it is well known to Indian musicians and to Karnataka Kangito, which is the Indian classical music. You'll find that translation in your text. O mother who loves the lotus seat, ever delighting in the music of the veena, ever joyful, ever merciful to me. That's the first section, the Pallavi section of the Kriti. So it comes in 3 parts. The next section, the Anupallavi, save me who have taken refuge in you. O you with feet as tender as sprouts, you charm the hearts of poets. You dwell in the lotus. You of the jeweled bracelets. Very flowery, very descriptive language about the goddess. Lotus-eyed mother who is gracious to the lowly who seek your mercy. Mother with a face as lovely as the autumn moon. Pure lady, O Saraswati, chaste, ever fond of learning. Lady with breasts like ceremonial vessels, complete being who holds a book in her hand which bestows all dominion. Very, very descriptive language and very poetic about the description of this goddess. And that's the music that you're listening to in the Kriti, the middle section of this music. Last time we talked about the first 2 sections of the piece, the first of which was designed to simply set up the raga, to explore these pitches that are going to be listening to for the next 22 minutes. Okay, that's the Alapana section. Then, starting at about 3 minutes and 20 seconds, the Tanam section, in which the beat becomes more definitive. Right? We get a more definitive sense of beat at that point. And so as you listen to your CD, you can fast forward through it if you don't want to listen to all 22 minutes of it. And you can move to the Tanam section and hear what we're talking about here. Now this is about 2 minutes in right here. We're still exploring the raga. You notice as the raga is explored, the shake that happens on one of those notes? Which one is it? Did you notice that in your text? that this particular raga, as it's described in your text, has the second note, the re, in the transcription that you have in your text, is a D sharp, okay, with C as the sa, the tonic. Now, when the descending form of that raga takes place, there's where the little shake appears, and you see it listed as a vibrato in the transcription that you have in your text. So when that raga descends, you expect to hear that little shake happen on that, and I think that's what you're hearing right here in this section of the Alapana. So that's the exploration of the raga. Now let's listen a bit to the tanam section where the beat becomes more defined. And this goes on for 5 minutes until approximately 8:25, and then the kriti itself starts. So here's the end of the Alapana section and moving into the kriti itself, which is a tune everybody knows. Text, you will find a transcription of these notes and the actual syllables Sarasiruha underneath the actual pitches that you're hearing here at the very beginning of the kriti. See, there's where the actual words come from, but of course you don't hear them sung because they're all so familiar to everybody that we don't even need to hear them, just like the TV commercial logos that we discussed in our last session. What else do you hear here in the kriti instrumentally? Improvisations, okay. And what about the instrumentation? The shruti box has been going the whole time. Yeah, that's the drone, right? That's the drone. But we hear the madrungam for the first time. This is where the madrungan comes in for the first time, and we start to hear that here in the kriti. Yeah, but the shruti box continues, and something that I don't think I mentioned effectively the other day was that the shruti, the drone, is not only the tonic, sa, but it is also the fifth, pa. There's actually a fifth going on there. Like that. So sa and pa are both being played by the drone, in this case, the shruti box. So this is the main event, and it's going to go on until about 15:45, at which point a new improvisational section called the Kalpanasvaras begins. This section is an improvisation on the actual notes that make up the raga, but the madrungam is going to continue. So as you move ahead then in the recording to 1545, we'll hear just a bit of that. So be honest, how many people listen to this whole piece? What happened? Your battery died. Oh, too bad. During the piece? In the last minute. Oh, okay. But somebody did. Okay, some of you did. Okay, so here we are now at 1545. And this goes on for about 3 minutes. And then we go to the last section of the piece, which is the drum solo. Now, as you listen to the drums, in this case the madrungam played, do you notice that every once in a while when it plays, it gets a tone? There's a little ringing tone, and the player lets it ring for a bit. You can do that same kind of thing on the tabla. The same principle applies, because certain places where you hit the drum are kind of a dull thud. But in other places, you can actually get a tone. Depending on where you hit it, you can get various tones to come out. And these drums are both capable of being tuned very specifically. Hear that one? And I am by no means a tabla player. But the people that know how to play these instruments know how to get just the right sound out of it by hitting it in just the right place. And we'll be talking about that a little bit later, because the tabla actually has a set of syllables that go with hand placement on each particular part of the drum to get the particular tones that the player wants to get. And so we're going to be listening to a recording of a tabla player in a little bit that will give you a little bit more information on that. So we end up then finishing up by only having the drone strings playing on the veena, but then the madrungam, and this is a tabla, but the madrungam drum finishes up this particular composition all the way to the end. Okay, now, are there any questions about Sarasiruha, this big, long piece of music? Okay, one question I would ask, if I were in the class, is do we need to know all the names of these sections, their Indian names on the test, like the Alapana section and the Tanam section and the Kriti? I think it would be good for you to know what a Kriti is. I'm not going to expect you to know the names of those individual sections 1 through 5 that we just heard, or the individual sections of the Kriti itself. It's actually in 3 parts, so you don't need to know those names. do know what a kriti is, do know that it's in 5 parts and that the 5 parts have different functions. Yes, people familiar with Indian music will be so familiar with this style that they will know that the kriti is going to come in the middle, and then when the kriti is over, then they're going to move into the improvisational section, and then finally the drum solo. It's a very well-established form, just like we would expect a chorus to come in a pop song at a certain point, or a bridge or a verse. And so, yes, it's very well ingrained for the people that know this music. Good question. Okay? Okay, a long piece of music. If you have not done so already, please take the time to try to listen to the whole thing. I think you will really benefit from taking the time to hear it all the way through, to move from your Western sense of listening and your Western sense of what music is to a more Eastern sense. It gives you an appreciation of this culture that you will not have otherwise. Now, remember that the music that we've talked about on your CD is strictly from South India, the Carnatic Plain. There is also a very vibrant style of music in the north of India that your book does not delve into. And the 2 most prevalent instruments there are the tabla and the sitar. You also see a lot of the use of the tambura as a drone effect. But the tabla and the sitar are by far the most famous. And what I would like to play you now is a recording by Zakir Hussain, a master tabla player, who is talking about the various ways of learning to play the instruments through saying syllables. Okay, so there are actually syllables, and each of these instruments is designed to be able to do that. I want to pass this around for the class to look at. But be very careful not to drop them. Okay, but I want you to get a sense, and everybody, while we're listening to this, try to play it. See if you can get the tone to sound on these drums, like that, as you pass them around. And as you do that, let's listen to Zakir Hussain.
Tabla is one of the most famous percussion instrument of North India. Tabla was invented about 700 years ago in the time of the king from Khilji dynasty. Tabla is one of the youngest classical instrument of India. It follows the old traditional instrument pakhavaj, which was used to accompany many different instrument and vocal music of North India about 2000 years. Tabla is a 2-piece instrument. The word tabla is Arabic. It means a drum, just like taiko is the name of drum. Similarly, tabla is the name of drum, any drum in the Arab world. Tabla also is the name of a war drum. And those war drums, the 2 drums, one on each side of the elephant or the horse or the camel they used to keep, they made them smaller and smaller and smaller. And it finally became in Punjab an instrument called dhama. And dhama looked like a big tabla. But now we've made it even smaller, more refined. Tabla has goat skin, and the right hand drum is tuned and has syllables like na, ta, thun, teta, tira. The left hand drum is not tuned, but it's a bass drum. It has 2 notes like kat and ghe. And you can play them in different combination of notes like this. And And then you have slide notes like this. Ghe, 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 ghe. That's a gamak. It's a vocal term from North India. Mead is the slide note, and gamak is the notes which wave. And then there's a very strong note like, and just scale notes like. Together you have notes like dhage tete tage tete, ghena nage tere kete, tere kete tak tere kete tha, ghena nage tere kete tak tere kete tha, tak tere kete tak tere kete tak tere kete tha di da, dha tere kete tak tere kete dha tere kete tha di da, dha tere kete 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 dha. So you can sing all these notes and you can play all these notes. So a little solo you will hear in teen tal. Teen tal 16 beats. 4 4 4 4. So 1 2 3 4 2 2 3 4 3 2 3 4 4 2 3 4 1. Now I will play for you the sound of the cannon, how the cannon is shot. Running of a horse.
So any of you ready to go ahead and start working on your tabla performance? Go right ahead. This would be a great day to start. An amazing art, and I can't even say the syllables as fast as the people that know how to do this are able to do, much less actually play the drums. But each syllable matches a technique on the drum so that you can learn it without having to actually be at the drum. You can internalize it as a syllable spoken and then move to the drum from there. And it's a great way of learning the technique. Now, the other instrument in this style the sitar, and probably the most famous proponent of the sitar is Ravi Shankar, who came to prominence in the 60s because of his association with the Beatles, and particularly with George Harrison. Does anybody know how that came about? First of all, has anybody heard some of the Beatles music that was Indian influenced? Yes. What songs? Do you know? Can't think of titles? Okay. Well, there's certainly references to Hare Krishna in certain Beatles songs. If you listen to I Am the Walrus, for example, there's a elementary penguin singing Hare Krishna. There's a line that goes along like that. But I'm thinking of more specific musical influences. It all started, if you've seen the movie from 1965 entitled Help by the Beatles. You like that movie? My son likes that movie too. The critics did not like it as much as A Hard Day's Night, but it was in color, and certain people gravitate to that kind of thing. The movie was a fairly convoluted plot about an Indian-based religious cult that had a sacrificial ring, and they would sacrifice somebody who was wearing the ring every day as their sacrificial person. And somehow that ring disappeared from the victim's hand one day and somehow appeared on the hand of Ringo Starr while he was playing the drums. Now, how that happened is not explained, but the rest of the movie is spent with this particular religious cult trying to get the ring off of Ringo's finger and eventually making him the new sacrificial victim. And it's sort of a James Bond plot tied in with the music of the Beatles. The critics didn't like it very much. They didn't think it worked very well. But one of the things that happened is that because it was an Indian religious group, they had some Indian session players on the set providing background music. And George Harrison became very interested in the sitar as a result of this association. And remember, this is 1965. Now, the first actual Beatles song that was released with Indian music in it was Norwegian Wood. Came out just in time for Christmas of 1965. That's when I got it, and it had that sitar solo in Norwegian Wood that had to be played at the very end of the entire recording sessions for the album because George Harrison had not mastered how to actually play those notes on the sitar by the time the recording was being done. So at that time, then, he went to India in 1966 and started studying the sitar with Ravi Shankar and spent a lot of time with him and became very close friends. Now, what's going to happen after that in the music of the Beatles is that the Indian music is going to start to have a very big effect on their music. You're going to see it creeping in more and more. Norwegian Wood was just the start. Now, around this same time, some of John Lennon's compositions were also being influenced greatly by Indian music and probably by hallucinogenic drugs as well. But the combination of the Indian music and some of the pharmaceuticals he was taking led him to write a song on this album, which is Revolver, called Tomorrow Never Knows. Does anybody know that song? Okay, let's listen to just a bit of it. And I want you to listen to the sense of timelessness, the suspension of time, as it were. The same kind of suspension of time that you would get if you listened to all 22 minutes of Sarasiruha, or the bhajan that I played at the beginning of this class. Listen to a bit of Tomorrow Never Knows, which John Lennon described as he wanted the sound as if the Dalai Lama were playing music over a distant mountain. okay, and you were listening to it from far, far away. That's the sound that he's looking for. And the lyric that I mentioned earlier, turn off your mind, relax, and float downstream, that comes from this song as well. It's the very last track. Okay, pretty experimental stuff for 1966. In fact, revolutionary. Yeah. What's going on in this song? What's the first thing we hear? The drone, the shruti layer. In this case, created by a tambura, which is another string instrument that we haven't studied. Okay? What else? Then what do you hear? The drums, set up in a pattern which is very similar to the kind of sound that a tabla might get, right? But being played on a drum set instead. Okay? And then you get the vocal after that. How many chords are there in this song? Anybody count? Doesn't take much. There's one chord. There's just a single chord going all the way through, thus the drone that goes all the way through it, right? And then the text itself, which actually comes from a translation that Timothy Leary did of the Tibetan Book of the Dead. And so there's a great deal of Indian influence, a lot of experimental kinds of sounds going on. This was when the engineers that recorded the Beatles were having a good time introducing them to things like backwards backmasking of tape sounds, guitar sounds that were then played backwards and repeated over and over again to create that kind of seagull effect that you were hearing. All of that sound went into this particular recording. As you listen to it later on, the last verse where John Lennon wanted to sound like the Dalai Lama from over a distant mountain range, they actually put his voice through a rotating speaker that it's called a Leslie speaker, and they had it on a Hammond organ. Old Hammond organs used to have these rotating speakers in them, and so they actually fed his voice through this Leslie speaker on an old Hammond organ and then recorded it from there to get this effect of this great distance that you get in this recording. It's a fabulous study of recording techniques. But you can also see the combination of East and West that is so prevalent in the 60s, where so much Indian music came into Western culture and combined in various ways. So we've seen so much of how the culture itself is affected by the West. Now we see how the West is affected by the culture of India in songs like Tomorrow Never Knows. That's the name of this particular song from Revolver. Let me play you another song that happened in 1967 by George Harrison. And this song was found on the Sgt. Pepper's CD or LP. It's called Within You, Without You. Once again, you're going to hear the three layers of Indian music in this style. Exploration of the raga, and now the tabla. Once again, the three-layer Indian influence here. Listen to this text. We were talking about the space between us all, and the people who hide themselves behind a wall of illusion. Never glimpse the truth, then it's far too late when they pass away. We were talking about the love we could all share. When we find it, to try our best to hold it there. With our love, we could save the world. If they only knew. 1967, Summer of Love. Very much tied in with the times, connecting the Indian music with the feeling of the times having to do with love can save the world, all you need is love, and very much a cultural sign of the times in the West in 1967. So we have a cross-cultural fertilization going on here, thanks to the meeting of Ravi Shankar and George Harrison. And also the Beatles got into transcendental meditation at this time with a fellow called the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, who had an ashram in India, at which they spent some time in 1966. So it's a very, very fruitful time for the collaboration of two cultures, the pop music of the West and the classical music of northern India. Now, I cannot resist but play a more recent recording that the Beatles put out in 2006. Anybody know about this? It's called Love. Cirque du Soleil, exactly. Yeah. Did anybody see the show? Didn't see the show? Cirque du Soleil approached the Beatles producer the Beatles producer George Martin about remastering a number of Beatles tracks to create an hour and a half of music to use for a Cirque du Soleil show called Love that was done in 2006. And what I want you to hear is their version of the two songs that you just heard. Now, what were the two songs you just heard? Tomorrow Never Knows and Within You, Without You, right? Tomorrow Never Knows is by John Lennon, and it's on Revolver. Within You, Without You is George Harrison, and it's on Sgt. Pepper's. What's going to happen is that George Martin is going to put them together and morph them together in a fascinating combination for Cirque du Soleil. They took Ringo's drum pattern from Tomorrow Never Knows and they put it with George Harrison's vocals on Within You, Without You, and they made a fascinating combination. And if you know both of those pieces, if you've heard them for years like I have, hearing them together is like, whoa, unbelievable. They fit together like a glove. And that was because Ringo, in his drum pattern in Tomorrow Never Knows, was essentially copying the tabla kind of pattern that you heard when you heard the tabla demonstration that we listened to earlier. So that kind of cross-cultural fertilization is still paying dividends. If you get the chance to see the Cirque du Soleil production of Love with music by the Beatles, I'd highly recommend that you do so. Another group that I would like to make you aware of, called Pieces of East, has done some very interesting combinations of Indian and Western pop music. They're actually a group of friends of mine from the Austin, Texas area. And they have a variety of songs, a variety of CDs out, and one of theirs, entitled Shadowbox, has some songs that show some interesting combinations of pop music and the Indian style that I'd like to show you. Here's a picture of the group. You'll find it on the PowerPoint. And as you can see, they are a combination of Indian musicians and Caucasian musicians. The guitarist Anuj is from India, and he and Laura, who is the vocalist and also the composer of most of the songs, are married to each other now, although they weren't when this picture was taken. Abhi is the tabla player, and he does some wonderful presentations about tabla music. And in one of the pieces, he actually has the syllables that you've heard Zakir Hussain use to learn how to play tabla. they're using those syllables as part of the vocals for the piece itself. Listen to how that works in this composition. This is entitled Lotus Ways. So in this case, Anush, who is the guitarist, is actually saying the syllables while Abi plays the tabla. So he's not saying the syllables and playing at the same time. But they're using them as a vocal sort of effect here at the beginning of this piece. And now you know what those syllables actually mean. They actually refer to the notes that are being played on the tabla at that time. You can also sometimes hear them make use of the tuned effect on the smaller drum of the tabla set. Here's the beginning of this particular piece entitled Time. Takes advantage of that tuned effect. So in this case, the tabla are used to accompany the vocalist on what would otherwise be a fairly unadorned ballad and provides a very interesting rhythmic design underneath. One more example from this group of this cross-cultural fertilization. In this case, a tune entitled Jimmy and the Elephant. And the tabla is accompanying, and then the raga is being played on the guitar in an interesting combination effect. Let's hear how that works. Hear what the guitar is doing, up and down. So in this case, the guitar is playing the raga up and down, the tabla is accompanying, and then everything else is a very Western style sound. Thus, that cross-cultural fertilization continues in many of the songs that they perform. We'll continue talking about India in our next session. For now, we'll see you then.